Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. We have a special program today where we have our guest is Karl Pohrt, still with Shaman Drum's bookstore as of today.
Yep, the rest of the day.
Yeah. And so we wanted to talk with Karl about this, as you say, long run with the bookstore. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, 29 years ago. It's hard to remember back that far. But I wanted to, I'd worked in the book business in the past, and I figure I've been selling books now for 35 years. And I've owned the bookshop for 29 years. But I was always, Ann Arbor is a great, as you know, having done this for Rip Rap for 12 years, Ann Arbor is a great book town. So I figured any place in the United States that could, would support an academic and scholarly bookshop in the humanities, that Ann Arbor could do that. And it did. Had a long, good run.
So when you started, it wasn't exactly this big of a space.
No, I had 2 rooms on the second floor. And there had been a bookshop there called Paideia Books. I managed that in the last maybe 6 months of its existence. It was a very good bookshop, more scholarly than Shaman Drum Bookshop is, and specialized in a lot of, say, E.J. Brill titles that were printed in the Netherlands, extremely expensive books. That was very interesting to be part of that experience. And then I started my bookshop in the location 2 rooms upstairs in 1980. Did that for a number of years and gradually took over more rooms upstairs and eventually moved downstairs and occupied, in essence, the entire building.
You got the space.
Yep, got the space.
So why did you decide to concentrate on the humanities?
Oh, because, it's very self-indulgent. I wanted to do have a kind of bookshop that would knock my socks off if I went into it. And there's a couple of ways that you can market. You can market anything. One is to sort of do an analysis of the community that you're part of, and then try to meet the needs of the community. Another way to do this, and an edgier, maybe more interesting way, is to try to inform the community what you think they need. And I sort of tried to do both in the last 29 years.
It's been very interesting. I mean, we're sitting right now in the spot where you had the different author events. Mm-hmm. And what were some of your favorite? I know you had so many. I mean, it seems like millions in looking back. But what were some of the highlights?
We had maybe over 250 a year, I think, something like that. We had a lot of academic and people who published books here at the university, and we'd do parties for them, and then also events in the evening, writers who were coming through. And Allen Ginsberg was here a number of times. Poet Gary Snyder was here a number of times. Patti Smith came once, as well as a number of wonderful poets and writers over the years, and so it's just been a great run to bring these people here and then let the community in Ann Arbor have a chance to see them up close and to talk to writers and poets and artists over the years. So it's been I tell people that I had the opportunity to sell good books to smart people for 29 years, and that one could do much worse with one's life.
Well, and some of the events you had outgrew the space you had in the bookstore.
Mm-hmm. We had, this spring we did a party for Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn, and I know that you interviewed them for the Rip Rap series. And we did that at the Hatcher Library. Had an event for them, and that was extremely interesting.
Standing room only,
That's
too.
right.
I mean, that was so packed, they actually had people outside the doors who still wanted to come in.
Right. A number of security people from the University of Michigan were there to apparently who felt that this was, still that the issues that these folks represented were still volatile in this culture, but it was a wonderful chance to interact with these folks who had, actually Bill spent a lot of time in Ann Arbor when he was a younger person. Over the years, he's also, he and Bernadine Dorn have also shopped a lot here and supported the store, which I deeply appreciate. And then this spring, I think it was during the month of April, the poet Ernesto Cardenal did a reading at the Hatcher Library. And I had been in, Cardenal was Minister of Culture in the Sandinista government and is now on the outs with Daniel Ortega. But I met him in Nicaragua in January, and one of the people in the delegation I was with invited him to come to Ann Arbor, and magically enough, it worked out. And Cardenal is now 84 and is probably the preeminent poet in Latin America these days. He's in his, I think, 83 years old and still getting out and around. So that was a wonderful reading, and that was also probably 250, 300 people there. So this is a community that values the life of the mind, and people turn up for events like that.
Well, and speaking of community, there's a number of things you've been doing over the years that were in the wider community, not locally, but the state and national level. Maybe one of them that maybe now people associate is, the different associations like the State Street and...
Also the Downtown Development Authority here in Ann Arbor, and I served on that proudly for a number of years. And one of the most interesting experiences I had there was, I recall we were working on the parking structure, or doing the reworking the parking structure on 4th and William Street. And I was at this meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, and engineers were doing this presentation to us about bricks. And we're talking about the relative porousness and the glazes on bricks. And we were presented with a number of bricks to look at. And in the middle of this meeting, I thought, I'd never in my life expected to be at, hearing a presentation like this. And I realized that the same issues that one brings to, say, doing a close textual analysis of a poem are the same sorts of things that you bring to looking at what's the best brick to use on a parking structure. So it's been an interesting and wonderful run here in Ann Arbor.
And then there's the Great Lakes Alliance.
A couple of years ago, I sort of saw this coming, the kind of crisis in the culture right now. And I don't think the way that we've conceived of bookshops really works very well for anybody anymore. So the question that we should all be asking ourselves is, what's the next iteration of the bookshop? And I'm talking now about, I don't think it works very well for independent bookstores or also for chain bookstores. And this is as a result of the drift of people to the internet to buy books. And so I'm not sure how to fix this. And I think that this is thinking about the bookshop of the future, that's going to be a kind of community collaborative project. And I'm very interested in what other people think about that and the ideas that they could bring to that kind of a conversation. and so that's what came up with. We came up with the idea of doing something called the Great Lakes Literary Arts Center, thinking of the literary arts in the same way that you do. People think about, say, classical music or jazz or dance in the United States, and at the in the earlier part of the 20th century, there were a lot of communities. In the 19th century, a lot of communities in the United States had orchestras and would bring in operas in their communities. And now there's less of a public audience for that. It's not part of everybody's lives, daily lives, and so you then move from the a private sector to making this a not-for-profit public thing, a public organization. For instance, the University Musical Society has been a model for me of what you might do in the book business. And whatever the iteration of the new bookshop is, I think that a piece of that is that it's going to have to be communally owned. I'd also remind everybody about the collapse of the way that the newspaper industry is changing in the United States, and I think that it's very these developments are all, I worry about them. And in terms of a democratic society, the importance of having an informed electorate and literate electorate is more important than it ever was. And I see that some elements in the culture go in the opposite direction from the way I think they should be going. But then again, I'm 61, so what do I know?
But that was one of the things that was started out. What was it last fall? Is the nonprofit?
Mm-hmm.
Could Shaman Drum become a nonprofit?
Mm-hmm.
And then it just sort of evolved. That was starting to develop, but not quickly enough for your business purposes.
That's right. I was just losing too much money to keep it going. And so I decoupled the Great Lakes Literary Arts Center from this bookshop. But we submitted the amended papers again at the end of last week, and my lawyer, Rick Manzak from Butzel and Long, is a wonderful person, thinks that this is going to be relatively smooth sailing. So the vehicle will be there to do this nonprofit literary arts center after this bookshop is gone. And if it's an idea that interests other people, then maybe we can collaboratively all do something together. And I'd include Rip Rap as part of that too. I'd invite you guys to be part of that.
Yeah, you've been a mentor for our program from the beginning. We had all those meetings, and
right.
It was a good thing that it wasn't until a couple of years after we were going you told me that you never thought we'd get off the ground.
Well,
but
I've been wrong about many things, Jim.
Yeah.
So
no, but I'm saying there was valid reasons why you thought that. But but you've been a colleague, a friend, and a mentor for us, because I thought that the conceptual, intellectual foundation for what you do was so important and so relevant, or whatever words you want to use. Because when I walked in this bookstore, it was always different, because it was carefully cultivated. It was carefully, filtered, or whatever you want to say, to bring out the best in the scholarship.
I have a friend, Paul Yamazaki, at City Lights Bookshop in San Francisco, and he and his staff use the word curate. The booksellers curate books in the same way that art curators do that in a museum. And given the dearth of leisure time that people have these days, I think this bookshop is always predicated on the idea that we pre-choose books for people and try to filter out a lot of the stuff that we didn't think was worthwhile. And so that's what this bookshop's been about over the years. And as I said earlier, and I think that you just alluded to this in what you said, that it's very we take the life of the mind seriously. But number two, that's my idea of something that's a lot of fun. Certainly can be.
What's also interesting, just before we started taping, people have a real fondness for this bookstore. I mean, a real deep association with it. And so they're kind of going through a mourning process in a way of the idea that it's not going to be open. I mean, as of tomorrow, that's it. But it's been an interesting thing because I've talked with other people, in preparing for this interview, and they've all said the same thing. They really liked the bookstore, that was an important activity, and it somehow was part of the Ann Arbor identity. Shaman Drum was a part of it. And so the one question is, what are you going to do now? I mean, people are also asking you that just before we started.
I'm not sure. My first thought was to try to get another job immediately. And my wife Diane, who's had to put up with me doing this for the last 29 years, said, and I really think she was right about this, that I should allow myself some time to think about it. And I think a lot of Americans feel that they've got there's always another act coming. And I don't think that's true. I think that I've got a few moves left. So I want to think carefully about that. And I like to review books, so I'm going to agree to be part of this new, the Ann Arbor Chronicle, which is the new iteration of the electronic and print version of the Ann Arbor News, the next example of that. And so I'll be doing some book reviewing. I want to heal from this. It's been very difficult since January it's taken its toll on me. And I figure I've been on a dead run, which I'm sure you feel the same way about what you're doing, for the last 29 years. And so I need a little time out and to think carefully about what I want to do next. When I turned 49, I entered a Zen Mountain Monastery in upstate New York for a month, and then studied for a while to be a lay person in an organization called the Mountains and Rivers Order. It's a Zen Buddhist order. And I stopped doing that when my father, I couldn't continue to do that when my father entered his final illness. But I think that I really like doing that, and I'd like to spend more time doing Zen practice, and after this is all done and over with.
I have to say, this is the most relaxed I've seen you for quite a while. I don't know what the dynamics are, but it seems like a burden has been lifted.
Yeah, I was actually hit by a car on State Street in April, and I wasn't doing what my mom always told me to do, and I didn't look both ways, and I was in a rush. It was the day of the Cardinal reading, and I did the introduction at the Hatcher Library, and so I was in a real rush. Didn't look where I was going, and a car ran over my foot, and then I knocked the mirror off with my shoulder, and that was a moment for me when I realized that nothing, fortunately, was broken except for my sense of immortality, which I should have let go of a long time ago. But I realized then that I was really should be more careful with my life and with what I was doing.
So as a book person, and in this one of these inevitable questions, what's one of your favorite books, or some of them?
Favorite books?
Favorite books?
I had to give a talk once on my favorite book, and of course that's a really, uh, you think, well, when? And it would be Babar and Father Christmas when I was maybe 4. Uh, but I picked Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And I read that, and I read that first when I was in middle school, or what we used to call then junior high school. And an English teacher that I had us spend a week reading books in class, and that's all we did. So maybe this was a way out of having to teach us anything, and so we just sit there silently reading. And I always felt that poetry was something that was inaccessible to me. But then when I read The Leaves of Grass, that was a revelation, and I realized that it was accessible, that I could understand it. I loved the rhythm and the language, the long lines of Whitman, and the democratic, expansive impulse of his writing. And I reread that a number of times in my life, and to see if the power was still there for me. Of course, the Bible, when I was a young person, I was raised in a Presbyterian church, and to be told at a very early age that there's one book in which everything becomes clear, which was the Bible, that was important. Then you sort of generalize from that that you're always looking for that book again, or some version of that book. I've loved Gary Snyder's poems.
I just remember you spent some time in the caves, didn't you?
Yeah, went to. I feel brings up the issue of gratitude, which I've been talking a lot about lately. But I've always been interested in visual arts and looking seriously at that. And back maybe 10 years ago, the poet Clayton Eshelman and Gary Snyder led a small tour to the Dordogne area in France, and looking at Paleolithic cave art. And so I had the opportunity to go into these caves, and this is artwork or paintings that were done on the walls of caves back in the middle of the last ice age. And so this is the first artistic representation of art by human beings that's left. And so I had a chance to look at this stuff close up, and spent for a while. I was attending, when I was on the board of the American Booksellers Association. We'd meet in the offices were in Tarrytown, New York, so I'd get to go to New York a couple of times a year. And I would go to the Metropolitan Museum, and I wanted to get to know that museum carefully. So, I can look carefully at art for about an hour to an hour and a half. And so I'd pick a different room every time I went to New York at the Metropolitan Museum, and then would just spend it in that room looking carefully at paintings and art. So I've been really lucky in that way. My mother made sure that we went to a lot of art museums when I was a kid, so I was real comfortable doing that. So I feel as if I've been in the great Ryoanji in Kyoto, looking at the great rock gardens in the Buddhist monastery there. And so I've had a chance to look at the wide range of, both through time and space, of artistic representation by human beings since the dawn of time up until now. And I feel like real lucky.
One thing we didn't talk is how you came up with the title of Shaman Drum.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought it was, you go in the caves, and I know that they found a few weeks back a flute that they figured was done in the middle of the last ice age, but they also figured that the first musical instrument that human beings came up with was a drum, because it mimicked heartbeat. And a lot of the word shaman is the religious figure. Maybe in a hunting and gathering society, it was a word used to describe uh, religious people in Russia, uh, and uh, they used drums in religious ceremonies. Uh, the use of a percussion instrument to signal the movement from uh, secular time to sacred time. And shaman in Siberia, mixing their metaphors, often talked about drums as what they call ladders to heaven, and sort of ways to move out of our present consciousness into another way of consciousness. And you think about the use of percussion bells in the Catholic Mass, and that signals the end of secular time and then a movement into sacred time and then back in. And so the idea of a shaman's drum, shaman's drum, is that it's a kind of metaphor for facilitating a change in consciousness. It's an instrument that's used to facilitate a change in consciousness. And I thought that was a great metaphor for what a good bookshop should do.
Well, I've always felt that the most important dialogue that we need to open up is between the Anglo culture, or European culture, and the Native American about how to live here. And so that's why I felt this bookstore was opening up that dialogue in its own way. I mean, not that that was a specific thing, but it was this whole thing, like you're saying, the conversation, by how you brought it, how you vetted it, how you constructed it. And so in a way, while we're sitting here on the last day,
That's right.
I really think it's literally, you told someone before, it's the first day, where it's also having opened this up, it's never forgotten.
No.
You know, it's always there, and the research has shown that the people who come in contact with you are literally in your body. I mean, that's a part of you. And so I really appreciate taking the time to talk about it.
And I really appreciate the work that you've done with Rip-Rap, where you brought, again, honoring the local, honoring community, doing all this work for so many years, doing the preparation for writers and honoring the literary culture. That's a very important work. And so, on behalf of the Ann Arbor community and the generally literate community at large in the world, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you. So thanks for appearing on Rip Rap.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me, Jim.